Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our Sunset Series number 11, I believe. And we are really excited about today's topic on the preschooler brain growth and development strategies for the preschool years. My name is Lindy Way, and I'm responsible for the Nestle Nutrition Institute Africa for the East and Southern Africa region. Joining me on the line are our speakers and as well as Anna Marie De Beer. To start off with, just some housekeeping rules. We do have a chat function for you to post your questions throughout the talk. Please do not wait until the end. We may just miss out on a very, very important question. And just to take you through the agenda, I will introduce our speakers. And I will also, the speakers will speak one right after the other, so we are not going to have any breaks in between. Anna Marie will then take us through the Q&A session, which should last us about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how many questions you have. Please stay up until the end, and then she will close the session for us. Okay, so just for to start off with, for those who are joining us for the first time and are not familiar with the Institute, the NNIA is responsible for scientific nutrition education. We do not speak brands, nor do we promote brands. So the purpose of this webinar is purely scientific, and there is no expectations or obligation from the NNIA that by participating in this webinar, you will recommend, promote any Nestle product as a result of your participation. Okay, so to start off with today, I am very excited. We are joined by Jose Saavedra Pepe, and he is going to cover nutrition for optimal brain growth and development during the preschool years. Jose is Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He is a pediatric gastroenterologist, a clinician, an investigator, and medical and science business executive. He has created and developed the Johns Hopkins Children's Nutrition Center, which he directed for 10 years, and where he carried out groundbreaking research in the area of enteral microbiota and diarrheal disease. Until recently, he also held the position of Chief Medical Officer of Nestle Nutrition in Vevey, Switzerland. Dr. Saavedra has an extensive record of publications in the areas of nutrition research, clinical nutrition, intestinal dysfunction, that's a tongue twister for a Wednesday, microbiota, and disease preventative nutritional strategies with a focus on early life nutrition and long-term health. Our next speaker right after Jose is going to be Lisette van Heesten, and she is going to cover key brain building strategies during the early years. Okay, so Lisette graduated from the University of the Free State with a social sciences degree majoring in developmental psychology in 1990. She started the practical program in 1993 as the developer, and it's a family business with a husband responsible for the business side of things. And she has assisted tens of thousands of families from this comprehensively created structure. And it is also used in many other educational programs, including those in clinical practice for nursing professionals. She writes regular articles for AON and various other publications. So when she does the Q&A, she can tell us more about what AON is. She develops educational toys and acts as a consultant for nonprofit organizations that focus on infant and toddler development. When I spoke to her, I said, I wish I had known her when I was still, my kids were still younger, because she has a wealth of information to share. She also makes regular television appearances and gives presentations to parents, medical practitioners, and teachers to share information in a practical and easily understood way. So we hope that you are also going to benefit from everything that she has to share. While you are here, please use your phone and scan the QR code and register as a member of the Institute. From this side, I am going to hand over to Jose Saavedra to start with the first talk.
Thank you very much. It is really a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually, to discuss some areas that I hope are of interest, but are of particular relevance when it comes to how to foster brain growth and development with a focus on the early years of life. Brain growth and development are indispensable for realizing an individual's potential, and a brain requires the right nutrients, the right care to develop, and the right environment to thrive. So we'll be discussing today some of the criteria and the important concepts that relate to why it is critical to nourish the brain and how we might be able to do it. Now, early life is the period of the fastest rate of growth for the brain. In fact, by 2 years of age, 80% of the brain has reached its adult weight, and by 5 years, it's close to 90%. And in fact, during school years, it reaches its adult size. Gray matter, the cortical part of the brain, in fact, peaks even earlier, at around 7 years of age. And it is important to realize that after they peak in the school years, brain size and gray matter will decline, and in fact will continue declining for the rest of our lives. So whatever we're able to do at this point becomes critical in terms of maximizing the potential for cognitive development. Now, there are multiple processes that are responsible for brain growth and development. We start with neurogenesis, which is the formation of neurons, and synaptogenesis, which is the connection between all these neurons. And these happen at an incredible pace and are really mostly complete by 2 years of age. So the basic structure of the brain is pretty much complete by then. What happens after that is some additional growth, particularly from myelination, and an enhancement of brain efficiency from myelination and synaptic pruning. Now, myelination is this process by which the oligodendrocytes form myelin. That's this sheath that wraps around the neuronal axons, primarily composed of fat, which creates an insulation that speeds up electric action potentials and makes the transmission of the neuronal axon much faster. Myelination, this process, accelerates after 2 years of age and peaks in the school years. And it is what is responsible for the increased connection between neurons and, of course, the creation of white matter, which is what we see in the brain and on scans. The process of pruning is another critical phenomenon which also begins after 2 and peaks later in the first few years of school age. And it is a process by which the number of interneuron connections is drastically reduced. And what this actually does is eliminate synapses that are less used. It actually is a use it or lose it approach that the brain takes. And that clears the way for unimportant connections to be lost, so it shortens what we would consider the search between the information from one neuron to another. And a pruned cortex, therefore, is much more efficient when it completes this synaptic pruning component. Now, myelination and synaptic pruning thus increase the efficiency of the brain, and it does it in 3 main cortical areas. One is the sensory motor cortex, which is what is responsible, among other things, for coordination and handedness and adequate control of even fine muscles. The parietal temporal association complex, which is responsible for language acquisition, and the prefrontal cortex, which is what is responsible for what we call higher cognitive functions. And these include attentions, focus, as well as inhibition, meaning not focusing on many things at one time or not at the same time. It includes working memory, so that's how we learn to actually memorize and calculate in our head. Cognitive flexibility, that means going from one area of attention to another area of attention without losing memory. And goal setting, so that we know what it is that we want to do. All this happens in the prefrontal cortex, which is the last to gain the maximum efficiency. And this development in these particular areas is what leads to what we call executive functions. And ultimately, these are what constitutes intelligent and ultimately cognitive performance. So when these areas are developed, and in particular the prefrontal cortex, that is what is responsible for adequate acquisition of language, mathematics, and executive functions. Then that includes reasoning, so that we can use logic to understand and discuss issues with ourselves, problem solving, planning, and behaviors for which there is a goal. And this is what is called in neurocognitive science fluid intelligence. And the way we measure that ultimately is by the academic performance, the IQ of a child, as well as his or her capacity to affiliate with peers and develop social behaviors. Now, there are a number of determining factors for an adequate development and growth of the brain. There's obviously genetic components, there's nutritional components, which is what we'll discuss for most of this conversation. And of course, there's also environmental components, and that includes social, cultural, learning experiences, adequate sleep, and stressors. Stress can significantly alter both the composition and the function of some areas of the brain. Now, when it comes to nutrition, we've known for a long time that nutrition significantly affects brain growth, particularly in early life, which is the period by which or when we're developing and growing the brain the fastest. Children who are malnourished, that is the light blue bars, will have decreased gray matter acquisition, decreased white matter acquisition, and decreased total brain size when we compare it to children who are adequately nourished. Now, these are relatively small numbers of studies that have been done, but clearly document the fact that poor growth in the first few months of life, in this case mostly children with stunting in the first few months, will have a decreased growth in brain size. This, of course, is a reflection of poor growth, synapses formation, neurogenesis, and ultimately myelination. Now, what do we need for that brain to grow? The first, of course, is energy. Energy and calories are critical for brain development. But they're also critical for brain functioning early and later in life. Now, the adult brain roughly is 2% of body weight, but it uses 20% of the energy we consume. Children, that energy utilization is even higher. At birth, it's about 60%. And at 5 years of age, 50% of energy is utilized by the brain. In fact, if you look at those red and blue curves of glucose uptake and oxygen consumption, they actually peak at around 5 years of age. This peak in energy utilization of the brain parallels the rise in the formation of synapses and the increase in myelination in brain tissue. Protein, of course, is also necessary, and we need protein for pretty much all cellular functions, proliferation of the cells and neurons and oligodendrocytes, differentiation of cells, synaptogenesis. The brain actually has active transport mechanisms for 11 of the essential amino acids that we consume. But across early life and throughout life, specific amino acids become critical because they are the components for the synthesis of neurotransmitters. Tyrosine phenylalanine in particular are necessary for the synthesis of dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, histidine, arginine, threonine, for the generation of histamine, nitric acid, and glycine, and tryptophan for serotonin and melatonin. And finally, there is an important component of the utilization of micronutrients for the purposes of pretty much every brain development function, from neurogenesis to myelination, to the generation of neurotransmitters and the transmission of signals in the brain. Now, the most critical micronutrients for brain development and functioning are a relatively small number of micronutrients, including iron, folate, B12, iodine, zinc, and choline. It's a small number. And actually, guaranteeing the delivery of these nutrients guarantees adequate development. It is also critical to understand that deficits that happen in early life, for the reasons that we just mentioned before, are going to affect the brain function across the lifespan, depending on how development went. And this is what ultimately is the true cost to society of early malnutrition. And another important thing to mention here is that many of these micronutrients, of course, have multiple actions, but there's a couple of common denominators. And as you can see, iron in particular is necessary for all brain developmental functions. And it is important to mention iron not only because it is critical across the board for all these processes, but because, unfortunately, iron deficiency continues to be the most common nutritional deficiency in children worldwide. And that includes developed countries. Even in North America today, there is a roughly 10 to 12% deficiency in adequate iron stores in otherwise healthy babies. There's about 2 billion people globally with iron deficiency, with or without iron deficiency anemia. And it is fully understood that iron deficiency alters metabolism and neurotransmission. It disrupts myelination across the brain. And it is very well documented that infant children with iron deficiency anemia, even if mild, are going to be at risk for poor cognitive development, poor motor, social, emotional, and neurophysiologic development across the board. And the last macronutrient that is critical is fat. In fact, 60% of the brain is composed of fat. And myelin, in particular, is composed of a tremendous amount of fat, 70 to 80%, of which 20% are polyunsaturated fatty acids, some of which can be generated by the ingestion of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. However, not all children necessarily, because of the lack of these fatty acids, will be able to synthesize polyunsaturated fatty acids, and in particular DHA, which is the primary component of membrane phospholipids. DHA is critical to neuronal pathway speed and efficiency, and particularly because they're a major component of the process of myelination. Finally, there are a number of other factors that we've begun to understand better that go beyond the standard nutritional components that we think of in the diet. The GI tract and its microbiota, in particular, clearly appear to be connected with the brain. This happens throughout life. By the vagus nerve, which is widely innervates the gut and goes directly to the brain, or through circulation. There are a number of signals and mediators that include neurologic signals, anywhere from the nervous signals from the gut regarding distension and pain, all the way to neurotransmitters that go from the gut to the brain and vice versa. It's of note, for example, that serotonin, which is important in a number of brain processes, in fact, the highest concentrations occur in the gut. The gut is a reservoir for serotonin. There's also hormonal mediators, ACTH, cortisol, go from the brain or stimulated by the brain and affect gut physiology. On the other hand, gastrin and ghrelin are hormones that go from the gut to the brain, signaling a number of activities that can and ultimately affect the brain, and a number of inputs from the brain will affect gut function. And this is what today we call the microbiota gut-brain axis. And only in the relatively recent past have we begun understanding that there's a significant association between gut function and specifically the gut microbiota composition and cognitive outcomes. As we mentioned, there's a number of developmental components in the brain that are happening at the time that we have a significant bidirectional discussion between the brain and the gut. And for example, it's been shown that changes in the microbiota or differences in the microbiota, in this case, the diversity of the gut microbiota is associated with visual development and expressive language at 2 years of age. In other words, receptive and expressive language were different in children who developed different types of microbiota based on the diversity of the microorganisms that these children had in the gut. When you divide them into 3 different levels of diversity, there will be 3 different levels in the longitudinal trajectory of receptive language at the top and expressive language at the bottom. Now, one of the mechanisms that is critical in the development of microbiota of children in the first months and the first couple of years of life is the components in breast milk. Human milk oligosaccharides are these carbohydrate molecules which have a number of different compositions and residues which exist in human milk. In fact, human milk has a large amount of HMOs that are in a higher level by weight in human milk than protein. They're the 3rd largest component of the solids that exist in human milk. And these carbohydrate molecules, of which about 200 different types have been described, these have no true nutritional value per se to the child. They have only significant nutritional value to the bacteria that we find in the microbiota of children. There's as we mentioned, there's a large number of these molecules which we've begun to identify and break up into 3 structural categories. There's the neutral fucosylated. So these are small carbohydrates that are not absorbed by the infant, that have a fucose molecule attached to them. There's a number of them, but 2-fucosyl lactose is by far the largest HMO in terms of quantity that we find in human milk. The second component is the neutral non-fucosylated, like lactose and neotetraose, for example. And then the third component, what we call acidic silylated HMOs, of which 3 silylactose and 6 silylactose are among the most abundant. And it has been only in the last few years that we have been correlating the presence of HMOs to the development of cognition in children. In this particular study, which is just a couple of years old now, cognitive development at 24 months of life is associated with a concentration of 2-fucosyl lactose in human milk. The higher the concentration of human milk, the higher the cognitive development as measured by Bailey scores at 2 years of age. In another study, and this one is in children in Africa, the concentration of silylated and fucosylated HMOs in breast milk was also associated with language development at 18 months. In this case, the high concentration of fucosylated or silylated, which are the light gray bars, compared to children whose mothers had low fucosylated and low silylated HMOs in their milk, those children with higher concentration had a greater development of language, in this case measured by number of words by the MacArthur-Bates inventory of words in children, than those children who had lower concentrations. And these differences became gradually significant. And finally, there's another study, this one is from Europe, showing that the concentration of 6 silylactose and 2-fucosyl lactose in human milk are associated with cognitive development at 6 and 18 months. On the left, the concentration of 6 silylactose on the x-axis compared to the cognitive composite score at 18 months, and on the right, the 2-fucosyl lactose and composite motor score already at 6 months of age. So there's a correlation in this. Now, it is important to mention that all these dots are within what we would consider normal. However, it is becoming increasingly apparent that there's a relationship between this HMO concentration and the scale of cognitive development in different children. Overall, at least what observational evidence indicates till now is that HMO exposure in early life can enhance neurodevelopment outcomes in later infancy. Whether these are direct effects from the HMOs, but most likely indirect effects through their modulation of the infant microbiota, obviously is an area that still needs to be studied much more. Now, all these nutrients and functional components need to be met for adequate neurodevelopment. The first, of course, is providing all the micronutrients necessary, and this is obviously done best by providing a child the dietary diversity that is necessary to provide micronutrients. Now, this includes, of course, breastfeeding, and in this case on the right, we have listed the 8 food groups as both WHO, FAO, and UNICEF describe them, including not only grains, which is the most common food kids get, but unfortunately they don't, enough vitamin A, fruit and vegetables, legumes, nuts, meat, eggs, and dairy. And dietary diversity generally is described by providing at least 5 of these 8 food groups, breastfeeding included. The next way that is critical in delivering these nutrients is not only dietary diversity, but of course adequate relative amounts of these foods. And it is increasingly important to educate parents on the fact that half of the volume of the food that children should have on the plate or the cup or the bowl needs to be fruits and vegetables, and the other half composed of grains and proteins, aside from dairy and breastfeeding, especially in the first 2 years of life. Together with those foods that we provide, there are a number of foods that can and should be limited, which we don't have time to discuss, but obviously added sugar and added salt in early life are one of those things that we need to severely control, so that a child not only does not get additional empty calories or extra sodium, but also does not develop the behaviors that will facilitate its change in food preferences later that will alter what is a diverse diet. And finally, it is critical to understand that in most settings, and as I mentioned earlier, including developed country settings, the use of fortification of foods can significantly improve the chances for delivering adequate levels of micronutrients to children. Children should, especially in conditions of an inadequate diet, when there's accessibility and availability, receive fortified foods that are designed for infants and young children, whether they're fortified in the food or fortification happens at home. So, there are key nutrients that are relevant to maximize brain growth and development, and ultimately the neurocognitive potential of a child. And as we said before, it is a relatively small number of these nutrients that are necessary. Outside energy and protein, again, iron, zinc, DHA, choline, folate, and B12 are that critical component of micronutrients that can help guarantee adequate development of this potential. But there's also another component that has to do with the inputs that the brain receives, and this is experience. Experience-dependent neurodevelopment is also critical in shaping the brain. And this happens through the inputs, external inputs that the brain receives. Nutrition, myelination, synaptic pruning, what these are allowing for is a continued change in the structure of the brain, the formation of neurons, the connection of neurons, and the change between connectivity patterns throughout life that happens not only through adequate nutrition, but through external inputs. Now, this is what's called neural synaptic plasticity. And of course, this is part of what allows the brain to learn. This plasticity, which is very high in infancy, but continues throughout life, is what allows social, emotional, and other environmental inputs to affect brain structure and cortical connectivity. That is why the brain can continue to be shaped even after childhood. So, the brain growth and development, as we said before, are indispensable. And the right environment, the right nutrition, and the right care are necessary for an individual's full potential development. In conclusion, multiple sequential processes are responsible for brain growth and development. These include neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, myelination, and synaptic pruning. Now, these occur in the different parts of the cortex, the sensory motor, temporal parietal, and the prefrontal cortex, which significantly accelerate their development in the preschool years. Each of these processes is dependent on adequate energy, specific nutrients for brain growth and development, and these include iron, zinc, B12, choline, and DHA. And these are particularly sensitive nutrients to ensure adequate cognitive development. Ensuring adequate nutrient intake is essential to enhance this development and ultimately the academic performance and productivity of an individual. Adequate diverse diets, appropriate fortification, and the provision of functional dietary components like the HMOs, and that becomes the relevance of breast milk, can enhance neurodevelopmental outcomes. Social and other environmental inputs throughout childhood affect brain development and function. Consequently, they will affect neurologic and psychosocial development of the individual. And ultimately, provide that individual with the potential for becoming productive members of society. Thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully we have some time for questions.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much to Lindiwe and the NNIA for inviting me. During the next 30 minutes, I will be sharing information aimed at making it easier to encourage parents of young children and build their confidence. The goal is to inspire them to help lay the foundation for their children's success by applying key brain-building strategies. Allow me 30 seconds to provide some background. My husband and I founded the Practica program in 1993. It's a home-based, play-based kit that's used by parents and caregivers at home to stimulate all of the 50 school readiness skills from the age of 2 to 6, and then the 14 fundamental developmental skills for children younger than the age of 2. So we're very proud of it. We've been going for 30 years, and it is a very uniquely structured program. So why go the extra mile and share information with parents? Well, Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. And Ralph Smith is also quoted as saying, people learn at the fringes of what they know. This is why when we help parents expand their knowledge, they end up making better decisions on behalf of their children. They spend their time differently. They consider their choices with a new level of discernment. So furthermore, since learning takes place at the fringes of what we know, parents are also able to learn more as the circumference of their circle of knowledge grows. There's a definite cascading effect. So we're absolutely making an investment. Parenting attitudes are influenced by parents' self-belief about their ability to succeed in the parenting role. So as they develop a more expansive and detailed understanding of their children's development and needs, they become increasingly more open to getting more advice and applying what they've learned. Let's have a quick look at brain basics for parents. Now, the circumference of a baby's head increases from 35 centimeters at birth to a staggering 50 centimeters at 21 months. This is very interesting to parents when we share this to them. And then during the following 19 years, we have to add, The circumference only increases by another 5 centimeters to reach a total of 55 centimeters at the age of 21 years. So the reason for this is that an overabundance of brain cell connections develops spontaneously according to a genetic timetable during the first 2 years of life. Here's how it works. We know that as adults, new connections form to create new neural pathways between our brain cells whenever we learn something new. This is called structural neuroplasticity, you know that. Babies also learn by developing new networks of connections between their brain cells, but it happens in a very different context. As adults, you and I, we can choose when we want to learn something. We decide to learn to play the guitar or to learn to speak Japanese, and then we apply ourselves to study and practice. We typically learn new skills intentionally and with effort. However, babies cannot do this. Their prefrontal lobes aren't wired to the extent where they can intentionally study and learn new things, and they have a lot to learn. So this creates a problem. To solve this problem, nature spontaneously deposits an overabundance of trillions of preliminary, I always call it prefabricated, brain cell connections, or synapses, during the first 2 years of life into the various brain regions according to a predetermined timetable. So their purpose is to lie waiting, ready to be activated by experience. So as a result, during the formative years, that's about the first 6-7 years of a child's life, children don't need to build new brain cell connections from scratch as they learn, as we adults do. Instead of learning through conscious effort, their brains are shaped by experience. Neural networks that contain synapses that are frequently used are hardwired into the brain to be used, while the rest are pruned away to make space for the more popular ones to expand their neural networks. So by the time a child reaches adulthood, 40 to 50% of the preliminary brain cell connections that were available at 2 years of age and 15% of the original 100 billion brain cells that were available at birth will be pruned away. In most brain regions, pruning has done its good job by the child's 7th birthday. However, as indicated by the yellow line on the far right, the prefrontal lobes are fine-tuned into the mid-20s. This region governs a person's ability to plan, self-regulate, and engage in abstract reasoning. The blue line on the left represents the neuroplasticity that is available to each one of us throughout our lifespan. The green line represents the exuberant synaptogenesis, or those overabundant synapse formation that I was talking about, that takes place during the first 2 years of life. The purple line indicates the importance of the first 3 years for laying a solid foundation for socio-emotional development. And finally, the red line there represents the pruning of school readiness skills during the first 6 years of life. This is our list at the practical program of the 50 school readiness skills that play a role in when a child is tested for school readiness prior to going to school. Since the formative years fly by in the wink of an eye and the pruning process loses momentum over time, it's important to play games and use focused everyday activities to help develop each of these skills from as early as age as possible. In other words, that would be from 2 years of age. Now you may ask, what about the first 2 years of life? What's the best way to support a baby's development? The first 2 years provide parents with a unique opportunity. The key is to follow a child's lead so that we can do the right things at exactly the right time. Parents love to learn that babies spontaneously do new things all the time because new brain cell connections are forming in all the various areas of their brains. And although it may be at a slightly different pace, we know that, their baby will be developing according to a set pattern in each of those 14 different areas of development. What's more, they can help build their baby's brain by simply responding to what the baby is doing. All the new things as they emerge, the parent responds, and by doing that, they hardwire those connections into the brain. As an example, when a baby smiles socially at 6 weeks, parents typically respond by smiling and cooing and praising their baby. And by doing so, they're practicing this newly emerging skill and hardwiring the new brain cell connections that made it possible into their baby's brain. They do this unintentionally, but the crux of the matter is that they're following the child's lead and they're doing the right thing at exactly the right time. Now, the 14 fundamental areas of development that all develop according to a little timetable like this, and all can be hardwired at the different points of newly emerging skills, are intellectual development, curiosity, play, concept of self, sensory perception, emotional development, physical development, independence, manual dexterity and eye-hand coordination, social development, listening skills, language comprehension, and speech development and communication skills. Now, all of them develop at the same time, like a wave. Sometimes one might be a little bit ahead or another one might be catching up, but they all develop at the same time. And that makes it a lot of fun, but also a little bit overwhelming for parents. So most parents are actually unaware that so many different areas of development are unfolding simultaneously during the first 2 years of life. And this is a pity because they're missing out on a myriad of little highlights that can be celebrated and supported if only they knew what to look for and how to respond when they see it. So parents benefit when they start to view milestones, and this is what we need to help them to do, is not to look at a milestone as a little checklist, but rather view milestones not only as red flags, but also as guideposts. A red flag milestone says, at this age, a well-developing child should be able to, and it looks backward at everything that should have happened already. But milestones can also serve as progressive markers that say, at this age, a well-developing child is ready to learn to. And then it looks forward and it looks ahead and it changes the parent's whole perspective. When parents know what they're aiming for, they're motivated to do more. For example, why talk to babies from day one? Many parents don't talk to their babies before they start talking, and we know how counterproductive that can be. So young babies need to hear as much language as possible, starting as early as possible, to prepare them for cracking the language code by the time they are 8 to 9 months old. With enough experience up their sleeve at this age, that's when babies typically learn to spot words in sentences, so they're able to isolate the words. They do this by learning from the experiences that they had from day one, even prior to birth. All the language that they learned taught them which speech sounds are typically used at the start or at the ending of words, so that they can isolate the words within sentences. For example, English-speaking babies typically learn that bull and ka are often used at the beginning of words, but never at the end. You don't get a word ending at bull with bull. And other words such as ing are usually used at the end and not at the beginning. Think of words such as blue, block, blow, blush, as well as cat, cap, can, camera. So when a baby hears those words, they know that's the start of a new word. When they hear book. Then also think of sing, thing, wing, and ring. They know that's where the word ends on the ing sound. So how many English words do you know that ends with bull or begins with ing? See, it really does work. So being able to isolate words like that has a cascading effect, because now babies, when they can isolate the words, they can spot the popular words. And when they spot the popular words that their parents and the people around them are using, then they can identify the most important keywords of the language. This way they learn the most important words first, and then they decipher the meaning of these words by paying attention to the context, the speaker's gestures and tone of voice, as well as the meaning of other words in the sentence. Unfortunately, babies take longer to crack the language code when they don't receive enough language input, because it takes them longer to figure out where the words are. So this puts their speech and language development on a lower trajectory altogether. The more words they know, the easier it becomes for them to learn the meaning of new words, because knowing more words provides them with more clues to work with. In other words, babies who know more language learn more language. So we know that it's important that young children hear language and that they need to hear it from people, not screens. Because people are interactive, people can change the pace of their speech, they can repeat certain words and sentences when they see that their child is not following, they can wait and see whether the child is following what they're doing and elaborate and adapt to the child's needs. Now, when we want to motivate parents to talk to their children, the easiest way to get them talking is to advise them to use self-talk and parallel talk. So that's why I'm sharing that tip with you guys. Self-talk involves talking out loud about what a person is doing, seeing, hearing, thinking, or feeling. So self-talk, I will be talking to my baby about what I am doing, seeing, hearing, thinking, or feeling. While parallel talk is saying out loud what I think my baby would say if he or she would have been a little bit older and able to speak fluently about what he or she is doing, seeing, hearing, thinking, or feeling. So it's very simple to explain to parents, and they love doing it. We always advise even our pregnant parents to practice self-talk and parallel talk on each other. Babies and toddlers' processing speed and their vocabulary, as well as their sense of curiosity, increase radically when their parents and caregivers use self-talk and parallel talk as a conversational style. It's the easiest way to immerse children in language, as speech therapists like to say. This brings us to the importance of reading to children. Something that's going out of fashion, and it is incredibly sad. Typical picture books expose children to a linguistic and cognitive complexity which they would not otherwise encounter. Having conversations with children is crucial for laying a solid foundation for language, communication, and speech development. But reading to children makes a huge difference in terms of refining their language and thinking skills to prepare them for success in school. So in one study, a comparison was made between the language content of 100 popular children pictures books and the language used by parents talking to their children. The findings revealed that for every 10 unique word types spotted in the parent-child conversations, there were 17 unique word types detected in the picture books. In other words, children who are being read to by caregivers and parents are hearing vocabulary words that kids who are not being read to are probably not hearing. This is also true for books that seem to be very simple at face value. Listen closely and you'll hear. The rhymes and carefully crafted sentences that authors use to tell even the most basic stories contain many complex sentence structures that well-educated children need to hear frequently so that they can become a part of their linguistic frame of reference. And yes, frequency counts. Children hear roughly 720,000 high-quality words a year when their parents read to them for 20 minutes every day. This number drops to 208,000 a year when they do so only twice a week. And a child who is read to only once every 2 weeks will be exposed to only 52,000 words a year. That explains a lot. Why screens are sneaky. So many parents feel uneasy about using a television as a babysitter, but they get over it, and then they do it all the time because they don't have words to describe their concern either to themselves or to other family members. So I'm going to try to help to give you words that you can share with parents so that they can have strong convictions about this. There are 5 good reasons to feel uneasy. It's the disruptive effect of screens, the inhibiting effect, the overwhelming effect, the dulling effect, and the displacement effect. The disruptive effect. Dr. Dimitri Christakis describes in his TED Talk on media and children that the unique way in which babies' brains are wired during the first 2 years that we've discussed makes it very risky for them to be exposed to screens. Their brains light up like Christmas trees whenever they engage in a serve and return interaction with people, or when they explore the environment, or even simply when they sit down and just stare at a parent's actions from across the room and listen to the voices talking to them from across the room, if a parent talks to them or talk to each other. All of these daily experiences are hardwiring different parts of the brain and teaching different areas of the brain to communicate to each other, and by doing so, integrating the brain. But so when they watch a story on screen, on the other hand, their limited brain wiring allows them to simply focus on the sights and sound without engaging physically, so that part of the brain is not activated. They're not experiencing anything in a three-dimensional context, following the storyline, understanding the dialogue, having any interaction, any emotional or social interaction with it. You've seen a baby stare at a screen. It's a totally different expression and experience compared to a baby engaging with real life. So as a result, when they watch screens, their lower auditory and visual brain regions are overstimulated, while the other brain regions, such as those that control movement, social skills, as well as their language and thinking regions, are understimulated. And consequently, the brain of a baby who regularly watches television is wired in an atypical way. I always think of a tree. You know those trees at the beach that get wind from one side all the time and they like grow in one direction? Similar to that. So it's an atypical development. It's not typical because it's not balanced. Let's look at the inhibiting effect. Now, these little gadgets that the kids are wearing, it's called a Lena recording device. And in a study led by Dimitri Christakis, they used these devices to record everything that was said in households. And they reported that the average number of words spoken between parents and children dropped from 941 to 171 words when a television was switched on in the background, even when nobody is watching. This is very concerning since we know that children need a language-rich environment to develop optimally. The overwhelming effect. Now, this is applicable to children of all ages, but this specific study was done with 4-year-olds. So it says that too much television can disrupt the way in which a preschooler's brain is wired for paying attention and staying on task. Those are the things that develop in the prefrontal lobes. Researchers say cartoons are most disruptive. In fact, watching cartoons can disrupt a child's ability to pay attention even if the clip is only 9 minutes long. That's the time span that they used in the study, provided that the program has typical cartoon-like qualities in the form of loud soundtrack and flashing rapid scene changes. So when a team of researchers analyzed the impact of a 9-minute clip of the program SpongeBob SquarePants on 4-year-olds, they found that the children's brains were so overstimulated directly after watching the clip that their ability to focus their attention was radically impaired. They struggled to follow changing instructions, to solve problems, keep information in mind, and to self-regulate. So that's what happens when children watch these Dragon Ball Z type of loud cartoon-like programs. Now the dulling effect. According to Dr. John S. Hutton, reading to children stimulates their imagination. Research shows that children who activate their imaginations through being read to or reading themselves develop higher activity in the areas of the brain that is responsible for cultivating mental images and deciphering and comprehending verbal cues. So they have to see and imagine what they hear in their mind's eye because the job is not done for them. They have to create their own mental images. So reading helps children practice imagination by letting the words describe a certain image while the reader then manipulates the picture in their mind's eye. So this practice of reading to children strengthens their mind as it acts like a muscle. In contrast to this, watching a story on a screen activates far fewer brain regions since no imagination is required. So the result is that these brain regions then don't develop nearly as well in children who watch television at the expense of listening to stories. The displacement effect. When children are watching television or playing video games for hours on end, they spend less time actively developing their gross and fine motor skills and having social interactions with people, especially peers. They also don't spend as much time as they otherwise would in nature, playing with pets, listening to a parent read a book to them, learning to be responsible and developing a sense of competence by doing household chores, or just being bored and making up their own little activity. So most importantly, too much screen time robs children of a myriad of important play experiences. So let's have just a quick look at the recommendations. So importantly, I think we have to look at two things. We have to look at how long or the time that a child spends watching television or staring or working with screens, as well as the quality and the type of programs that they look at. And in terms of types of programs, I want to share this particular website. It helps parents to choose child-appropriate shows. And we should encourage parents to have a look at it because it's by an educational psychologist, and she puts a lot of effort into rating various children's shows and motivate her opinions about her ratings. So it's on the screen, www.raisewildflowers.com/screen time. And here we quickly go through all the different recommendations. For 18 months or younger, no screens are best. The exception is live video chat with family and friends, 18 months to 2 years. During the 6 months from 18 months to 2 years, it's advised to limit screen time and avoid solo use. Parents should opt for quality educational experiences. They should watch programs and play simple games on tablets with their children, not let them do it on their own. And remember to explain what is happening on the screen. They should be advised to repeat a few selected experiences so that the children can remember the new words. A maximum of 10 minutes is advised for watching television and 5 minutes, only 5 minutes max on a tablet. And then, of course, for the reasons described earlier, parents should avoid background television. During the 2 to 5 year period, screen time should be limited to 1 hour a day. Parents should avoid cartoons that have those characteristics, quick shot changes, unnatural sound effects, storylines that are difficult to follow. So also background television should be avoided. And for children who are 6 years and older, consistent limits should be placed on the time spent watching television, the types of shows they watch, the games they play. It is important to make sure that screen time does not affect their sleep, their creative play, their exercise, or other activities necessary for a balanced lifestyle. So that brings us to the end of my presentation. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It was really such an entertaining, well, both of these talks now being not only entertaining, but really educational in so many ways. I'm sure there's quite a number of questions, but I will start with the first one. Please use the chat box again to type your questions in. And then also Lizette has left some notes in the chat box that you could use. Obviously, you could hear there's a lot of information there, and we just didn't have enough time for all of it, but it is in the chat box, so please, you can download those notes. And of course, the video will be, both of these videos will actually be available afterwards online, and you could look at them again. Good. I'm just checking if there are any questions at the moment. Let me just give me a moment to see if there's anything? I don't see anything as yet. So for Prof. Savidra or Dr. Savidra, I have a question, and that related to the variety of foods. You mentioned the 8 food groups and that at least 6 of them must be fulfilled to actually meet all these micronutrients. Now, one of the challenges that we have, especially in South Africa, and I think in the whole Southern Africa region, is that very few children actually make up on the what we call the minimum acceptable diet. Perhaps some ideas from your end on how we could get the kids to actually make all of those, or at least meet some of those recommendations, because 6 out of the 8 sounds like quite a lot.
Yes, and it is quite a lot, actually, if you think about the relatively poor variation we have today because of the way that, food and diet have evolved over the last, and this is just the last 50, 70 years. And before that, of course, things were very, very different. On the one hand, you had more variety. On the other hand, you didn't always have the availability and the accessibility to certain foods. I mean, just 80 years ago, nobody ate a tomato in winter in most of, the 2 hemispheres of the world. But today they are available. On the other hand, the way that the marketplace and commercialization works, those have decreased the amount of grains. We only consume 3 large grains of the more than 95 different types of grains and species that there are. So half of it has to do with agriculture, and that will, of course, entail a different approach as it relates to providing variety for people to have availability and accessibility, cost to these foods. But when that is possible, when there is availability and accessibility of a variety of foods, then it becomes important for the parent to make that decision. And yes, it's not easy to have at least 5 different types of foods. And by the way, of course, that can also be misinterpreted. That doesn't mean 5 different foods every meal. That means 5 different types of food in one day. And that is an important thing to express to parents and to moms choosing the different types of foods that kids should get. But of course, there can and needs to be a source of protein. So at least 1 legume or one type of meat. And we're talking about children between 0 and 5 years of age. There has to be at least 1 source of dairy. There has to be at least 1 fruit and a vegetable. And there has to be 1 source of the starch. Now, that alone doesn't sound complicated, but these are, the minimum that is necessary. And the one other, we could talk about this for a long time, but another comment that's critical is the skewness that we have with regards to current diets. More than 80 to 90% of children in the world today will consume a starch on a given day. But less than 20%, less than 1 in 5, will consume a vegetable on a given day. And and those are bad numbers. We need to change that. Some of it, as we said before, has to do with availability and access. But other things have to do with teaching a child to eat a vegetable. Yes, sugar and starch are going to be easier to teach just because of our ingrained preference for sweetness. But eating vegetables, which is where we're furthest behind, requires persistence. And continuing to offer a child until there's a magical number of 7 times to offer a food before you give up and consider a child will not eat any vegetables anytime.
Thank you. Lizette, a question for you is, and there's actually now the questions are coming in fast and furious, and we don't have a lot of time, but what we will do is, for those that we can't answer tonight, we will actually make sure that we get written answers from both Pepe as well as Lizette, and have that on the website as well. There was a question here around, does taking a child to an early childhood center form part of brain development? does it help to take them then there? And Lizette, maybe that links to the second question, which is what about working parents where you have both parents working who really, they leave home at 6 in the morning, they get home probably at 6 or 7 at night. Time for stimulation and talking and reading stories is pretty limited. So will it actually then help in terms of early childhood development centers?
Well, in South Africa, we have a very unique situation because we are able to have access to, it's quite easy for us to get somebody to take care of our child at home. It's not as easy to get somebody who has the right temperament, who is talkative, who is trained, who is focused on stimulating our child. But that is an option for us. So most importantly, it's important for us to know that we shouldn't expect our child to learn social or emotional skills necessarily from other children. Before the age of 18 months, they don't even notice other children, and they'd learn their social and emotional skills from adults. And then at the age of about 30 months, 31 months, when they start to view other children as friends, then they go out and they imitate what they've learned from adults in their relationships with their peers. So the foundation for social and emotional skills are laid at home. So that shouldn't be a motivation for people to send their child to a daycare center thinking, she's so lonely at home, or he's not seeing any friends, he's not going to develop his social or his play skills. That one 18-month-old child cannot teach another 18-month-old child to speak, so it's not going to happen there. But it is important for us to make the right choices, obviously, for our children in the context that they are in. And oftentimes, even mothers who are at home with their children find it so difficult because they might struggle with depression, they might have a problem of feeling very limited in the space, and they really do need support. They need to have somebody help them, and definitely when you're working full-time. So then it's important to know what to look for. I think I might want to just maybe I don't know if we have time for this now, but make sure to look for the right things. Make sure to look for a lot of language, play, interaction, that type of thing in a daycare environment. And then when you have somebody that takes care of your baby at home, also make sure to give them structure so that they have balanced interactions with the child and they have some kind of frame of reference to draw from. So that's my best answer in a limited.
And I'm so sorry for the limited time. One last question, and then I think all the other questions we will post to both Pepe and Lizette and ask them then to give us the answer on that. But with all the fad diets, I call them fad diets, but with so many children now on special diets, vegans, vegetarians, flexitarians, all dairy-free, are there specific things to look out for, Pepe, and this question is for you. Are there specific things to look out for in terms of the key nutrients that's important for brain development? When you look at these kind of fad diets, and what would your recommendation be?
Yes, I wish we had a couple of hours for that, but I mean, if there were a couple of important messages here, the first is that a otherwise healthy child who has no neonatal complications, doesn't have any major insults in early life or handicaps, etc. Leaving that population aside, the vast majority of children can and do tolerate foods of all food groups. Period. And that's just a hard stop. Now, there are many reasons why people can and could think of reasons to modify their diets beyond just having foods from all food groups. And that's, of course, there can be cultural reasons, historical reasons, religious reasons, etc. In those cases, I think it is critical to speak with your physician, your healthcare provider, your dietitian. I don't want to start rattling off things to watch for, but particularly protein in the first 2 months of life in children who don't get other sources of protein. It's hard to make it up with legumes, but it can be done. And that is just an absolutely critical factor. And the second one, which is not related only to unusual diets, but to even current diets, is the lack of iron. If we watch protein and iron under 2 years of age, we will already have made some progress.
Good. Thank you. I have a few more questions, but I'm really going to stop it here because we have to stop. Our plan was to stop at 10 past, and it's already 15, almost quarter past. I think on that note, we will forward all these questions that we have. Jean-Paul, we've got your question here as well. Rasinga, I think we've answered yours. So what we will do is really just then to forward these questions and make sure they get answered. It will be on the website. I think this conversation has just started. It feels to me there's a lot more to discuss, and I think as the questions come up, it actually gives us an opportunity perhaps to have more conversation around this and perhaps a bit more detailed conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to thank everybody, our speakers, Dr. Savidra, Lizzie, thank you very, very much for the time and really for giving us such great information. I do believe that every health professional on this call has taken something from that. I definitely did. I think the screen time story is such an important one, and TV has become a babysitter for so many parents. So thank you very much, and also both our speakers for the practical application of the things tonight. I really just want to say thank you very, very much. Also to our team and in the background, Lindiwe, thank you very, very much, and then Vanessa and her team from the source, thank you very much. And with that, I just want to say to our viewers, people who joined tonight, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. I know it's busy times, and it seems that this year is just running away from us. But thank you very, very much for joining us for the last hour. We really appreciate it, and we will be in touch very shortly. So from my side, good night, have a safe evening, and yeah, let's look after our kids. All the very, very best to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
numbers on a dial. Long enough to see the sun down. Long enough to slow it down.